and asking a question. All right, I think we're good. And Chris, if you could bring up Jessica's presentation, I'll do it over here real quick. Jessica attended South Dakota State University for her bachelor and master's degrees. During her undergraduate work, she worked for the National Park Service on the Niobrara and Missouri rivers, and also completed a research project comparing young common carp diets to native fish diets. Her master's project was focused on the reproduction of bighead and silver carp, also known as Asian carp, in eastern South Dakota rivers, including the James River. And prior to coming to North Dakota Game and Fish in 2016, she worked as the Aquatic Nuisance Species Program Coordinator for Kansas for 3 years. So, welcome, Jessica Howell.
No, Chris, that's the wrong one.
Chris, that's the wrong one. Could you switch to the other presentation, please? Thank you.
All right, can everyone hear me on the phone?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Just checking. Well, I want to apologize for being just a couple minutes late. Had another meeting that ran a little long, but I'm happy to be here and to talk to you all. And for the folks in the audience here, if you have questions as we're going, feel free to stop at me and ask me questions. For the folks on the line, we'll be happy to answer any questions you have at the end of the presentation. So let's get started. First, I want to give a little bit of background about the aquatic nuisance species that are currently found in North Dakota. Some of you already probably know some of this information, and if you don't, then hopefully we can teach you a new thing or two. Part of the reason I think they wanted me to come speak here is that I am new to North Dakota. I just started at the end of February, and prior to that, the previous A&S coordinators have been half-time A&S coordinators and half-time fisheries management. So this is the first time that we at Game and Fish have a full-time A&S coordinator. So hopefully I can start working with some of you folks a little more and be a little more involved. So just a little background on some of the species that we have in North Dakota. We do have curlyleaf pondweed, which is distinguished from our native not native curlyleaf, but our native pondweeds by the lasagna-shaped noodles that they, lasagna noodle-shaped leaves, excuse me, that they have. We do have clasping leaf pondweed that has the same shape of leaves as well, but curlyleaf can be distinguished from those by having serrations along the edge of the leaf margin. So we can tell them apart from our natives. They're typically found, these plants are typically found in 3 to 6 feet of water. And they are native to Eurasia, Africa, and Australia. They were introduced to the United States in the early 1800s. It's not quite sure how this plant was introduced because it was introduced so early in the 1800s. In North Dakota, we do have a few populations of this. The majority of curlyleaf pondweed in North Dakota is found along the Missouri River system. I don't know how to get that screen down. Oh, perfect. For you folks in the audience, I apologize. There is actually a map behind it. There we go. We have mainly curlyleaf pondweed in the Missouri River system, population in Metagoshi, and then a few other isolated populations around the state. Curlyleaf pondweed becomes a problem because it can be transported as plant fragments, which can start a new population. It grows very quickly and it can tolerate cooler water temperatures than our native vegetation. So once it gets in there, it can grow a lot earlier in the growing season than some of our native aquatic plants. So it shades them out and competes with them for resources. And so what you end up getting, instead of a diverse culture of multiple aquatic plants, is now you have a monoculture of curlyleaf pondweed that can grow in conditions that some of our native plants cannot. And it can form very thick, dense mats near the surface of the water. And so this is an example of one at Raleigh Reservoir here in North Dakota. And that is a problem if you like to go swimming or fishing, or you want to run your boat through there. It can be a huge problem for recreational users. And so we try to keep that species out of new North Dakota waters. The other thing it does is because it prefers the cooler water temperatures. It actually can't tolerate warmer water temperatures very well, and so in the summer, it'll actually die back. And when you've got a lot of decomposing material, you can imagine that decreases the water dissolved oxygen levels, and so you can sometimes get fish kills associated with curlyleaf pondweed. So that's curlyleaf pondweed. Another aquatic plant, invasive plant that we do have in North Dakota is Eurasian watermilfoil. This species has been widely used in the aquarium trade, which is actually how we believe that it got here in the United States in the 1880s. It's very difficult to distinguish from our native milfoil species. You can look at the number of leaflet pairs if you're familiar with plant anatomy at all. The Eurasian watermilfoil has 14 or more leaflet pairs per leaf, versus our native milfoils that typically have 10 or less. So it can be distinguished, and there are a few other distinguishing characteristics, but that's typically the easiest. It can be found in a little bit deeper water, so 1 to 15 feet. It's been reported up to 30 feet of water if the water is very clear and the light can penetrate. It's as the name implies, it's native to Europe and Asia, as well as parts of northern Africa. In North Dakota, we're fortunate. We have a very isolated population on the Cheyenne River. We used to have Eurasian watermilfoil in Dead Colt Creek as well, also in the southeast part of the state, but we did a water drawdown several years ago, and that actually did take care of it. So we've not found it in Dead Colt Creek since then. Just like the curlyleaf pondweed, it does a lot of the same things and can be moved in a lot of the same ways. So small plant fragments can actually start a new plant and in turn a new population of Eurasian watermilfoil. It also forms a very dense canopy, so same issues as the curlyleaf pondweed, but it can tolerate cooler water or warmer water temperatures as well. So this is an example of Eurasian watermilfoil, and this one's actually from Iowa, but we have seen this in other areas in the United States as well. So a lot of the same impacts, impacting recreational activities, as well as some of the biodiversity in the area of aquatic plants and potentially animals as well. I promise we'll get through this. For silver carp, this is one of the species of Asian carp that we consider as Asian carp. The other species are bighead carp, grass carp, and black carp, which we do not have in North Dakota, thankfully. We have had isolated reports of grass carp. We actually stock them, Game and Fish actually stocked them into a couple reservoirs, but they ended up dying out, which was a good thing. But we do have silver carp that have moved up into the James River. So far they've been stopped at the Jamestown Reservoir Dam, so that's a positive. One of the ways that they spread is, if you look at the picture on the bottom right side, these are the species. The top three are all species of Asian carp. The top one is bighead carp, the second one down is silver carp, and then the next one is grass carp. Luckily, black carp are a very limited distribution in the United States, so I don't have a good photo of those for comparison. But the bottom one is gizzard shad, which is a native fish, and we don't have strong populations in North Dakota because it's actually a little too cold up here for them. But in southern states and even in South Dakota, there are some pretty decent populations of gizzard shad, which when they're little like that, you can see they look very similar. And gizzard shad are a very popular bait fish. People like to catch them and then use them as live bait. And so when people are moving bait around, we have to be extra careful that they're not accidentally moving silver carp or related species. Some of the things that silver carp do, well, let's start off where they're found. They are native to eastern China, particularly the Yangtze River, and it's interesting to note that in their native range, they're actually threatened / endangered. And so they're trying to increase the populations there, and we're like, well, you can have all of ours, so just take them. In North Dakota, as I mentioned, they are just found in the James River, kind of in the southeast part of the state, up to the Jamestown Reservoir Dam, which acts as a barrier for them. for upstream movements. Some of the issues that we've had with silver carp and big head carp as well, but mostly silver carp, is the way that they eat. So they were introduced to the United States for aquaculture purposes in the 1970s. And they were brought in because they'll eat the small plants and animals out of the water. So they'll clean up the aquaculture ponds and get some of the algae and other small species out there so that the aquaculturists could see what they were producing. Well, when you transfer that to a native system, it's kind of a problem because they're eating the base of the food web. So they're eating the small plants and animals that our native species, whether it's insects or zooplankton or fish, rely upon. And so when you've got a species like paddlefish that's directly competing for those same resources, you can start to see impacts. On the left, the two pictures are impacts on paddlefish. This is somewhat anecdotal. These are two paddlefish that we collected. The top one is from 2010, when we had very limited numbers of silver and big head carp in the James River, where it meets the Missouri River in South Dakota. And that was from 2010. The next year is the bottom picture, and that's what the paddlefish look like. So you look at the top picture, and the fish is very round, kind of torpedo shaped. The next one, its head, it looks abnormally large, and the body is very skinny. That's a somewhat sickly fish. Its body condition is not very good, which means that if it has a really hard winter, you know, it might not have enough fat restores to survive and things like that. So that is a trend that we are seeing in some of our native fish that eat the small plankton as well. And of course, you've all heard of the flying carp, right? So that is the silver carp. They do jump up to 10 feet out of the water. And when you've got a fish that grows up to 80 pounds, that can kind of be a problem. I can tell you I've been hit by a 25-pound fish in the leg, and that bruise took a very, very long time to go away, and it's very uncomfortable. So definitely one of the more common things that we hear about and why people are rallying to stop these flying carp, because I know when I worked in Kansas, there were people that would get hit in the face and they had to have their jaw reset, or they had a broken jaw, or knocked a few teeth out, which I'm sure would be really awful to happen. So silver carp are definitely an issue, which brings us to zebra mussels, which I think some people might argue are an even bigger issue than silver carp. They don't look like much. They're very small. They grow to about 2 inches in length. They're kind of D-shaped or triangular shaped, depending on how you squint your eyes and look at them. And they have those light and dark alternating bands, which is where they get the name zebra mussel. They're very different from our native mussels. And some of the ways, besides the size, we have most of our native mussels are a little bit larger. Not all of them, but most of them are a little bit larger. But zebra mussels have what we call byssal threads. They're these little hair-like projections that they use to attach to hard surfaces. So if you look at the top right picture, where it's attaching to the rock, where that dark mass is, those are actually little hair-like structures, those byssal threads, that it's using to grab on. So if you wanted to remove that, you'd have to actually yank it off. It won't just fall off the rock on its own. The other difference is in their larvae. So our native mussels have a life stage that's parasitic, and they need fish to distribute their larvae. Zebra mussels don't have that parasitic form. Their larvae are just floating around in the water. So you can imagine why that's a problem with water movement for moving zebra mussels. Because now, instead of having to have a fish for that larvae to survive, now you have a larval stage that is basically just like zooplankton or algae or anything else in the water. And if you're not filtering it out, or you're not treating the water in some way, you could be moving zebra mussels from one location to another. So that's a very important difference between zebra mussels and some of our native fishes, or mussels. Again, they do typically attach to hard surfaces, so that's when you're looking for them, that's where you're going to see them. Things like boat docks and water intake structures, they really love those. They are native to the Black and Caspian Seas, and they were introduced in the United States in the 1980s. So they were first found in 1988 in Lake St. Clair and Lake Erie, and they believe that those mussels were actually introduced in 1986 through ballast water discharge. So I mentioned the larval stage is just little larvae, or little tiny microscopic organisms floating around in the water. Well, when they took on ballast water in the Black Sea, they brought it over, and when they took on cargo in the United States, they discharged that ballast water so that they could take on their cargo, and they released zebra mussel veligers. That's how we think they got here. So they've actually worked to address some of the ballast water standards since that time because of zebra mussels and other aquatic nuisance species such as the round goby that were introduced in a similar fashion. But unfortunately we have them, and they did spread downstream because their larvae, because they're floating around, can be moved downstream. And then we also got them from downstream movement. Thanks, Minnesota. So now we have them in the Red River. They were first found in Pelican Lake in 2009 in Minnesota, which drains into the Otter Tail River, which drains into the Red River. And we believe that that population came from downstream movement from the Pelican Lake population. So Canada can't blame us though, because Lake Winnipeg already had them before we found them in the Red River, so we're good there. So ways that they can move, I've already talked about the importance of moving water, and that's why it's important that you guys and we have a conversation about moving aquatic organisms in water transfers and water movements, things like that. But they can also be spread on hard surfaces. And so if you look at the boat prop down in the bottom right-hand corner, that's an example that came out of Lake Mead. Those are actually quagga mussels, which are very closely related. But that boat was stopped in Utah on its way up to go up there. So that wasn't just something that was set up. That was actually caught at an inspection station. The beer can, I mean, they'll attach to pretty much any hard surface. So if you're moving things like boat docks or boat lifts, in particular, are some areas where we've had some real concerns about the movement of these organisms on hard surfaces. Those are things that we're working to address as well. Zebra mussels filter feed on small plants and animals, just like the silver carp do, so they're having a lot of the same impacts, where they're eating organisms at the base of the food web and therefore affecting everything else. This is an example. This is El Dorado Lake in 2006. El Dorado Lake first found, this is in Kansas, they first found zebra mussels in this lake in 2003. And then a couple years later, the water, they went through a significant drought, and the water levels dropped quite a bit. And this is what they found on the shoreline. Those are all rocks and trees that are just covered in zebra mussels. So it's strong evidence that zebra mussels can have a huge impact on the habitats that are available for other organisms, and it shows you how quickly these populations spread as well. So what we typically recommend to people if they want to prevent the spread of ANS, and some of this is in our regulations and some of it's sort of a recommendation, is that they clean, drain, and dry all their equipment every time they use it. And that's not just boaters, that's not just anglers, that's anyone that's using the water. So what does that mean? The clean part of it is inspecting and removing anything that you find, basically. If it's plants, they need to be removed. If it's aquatic nuisance species, obviously those need to be removed. But even other organisms like snails, if you've got a lot of heavy mud, maybe you've got a boat anchor that you put down or tracks on a piece of equipment that picked up a lot of mud, the mud could harbor aquatic nuisance species as well. So we like to ask people to the point feasible. We recognize that sometimes it's not always possible, but before you leave that water body, get as much of that off as you can. And before you leave, make sure that all the equipment is drained. So I mentioned that zebra mussel veligers can be spread in water. Other things can as well, such as the spiny water flea. That's a species that we don't have in North Dakota, but has caused some significant impacts. The problem with those species is they're microscopic. So you could be harboring them and not even know it. It's not that we think people are purposely moving these things around. It's that sometimes they don't know what they have in their water. They don't know what kind of vegetation it is, and that sort of thing. So it's good practice to drain all water before leaving. That does include bait buckets as well. And we also recommend that people dry. So any of that residual water has a chance to actually dry and go away, because when you drain something, we know there's a good chance that there's going to be some water left. It's difficult to drain things completely. So we recommend drying as well. And if you can't dry it, like let's say you're on a fishing trip, you don't want to wait 5 days in between drying your boat, or you simply don't have the time. You want to be out there every day fishing. We recommend that you disinfect it. The easiest way is with hot water, but there are some other options if you have the time to do those. So that's a little bit about aquatic nuisance species in North Dakota, and now I'm going to talk about what our agency is doing to address these issues. And so if you have any questions, I'd be happy to take them, or I can keep moving. Okay, lots of silent stares. So we started our program in 2005 with the signing of our state aquatic nuisance species management plan, and that was not just game and fish, that was several agencies. And we actually have an aquatic invasive species committee, which he's on, Mike is on, so he can maybe tell you a little more about it. But we meet about twice a year. We decided we're going to meet twice a year. And we talk about aquatic nuisance species issues that are going on in the state. If there's new findings, we talk about those. We also kind of give updates on what our agencies are doing, and we're looking for opportunities to collaborate. So that's what that committee does. That's been going on since the state management plan was signed in 2005. Game and Fish has had regulations since 2008 addressing various aspects of aquatic nuisance species issues. And we did have some new regulation changes for this year as well, partially due to the finding of zebra mussels in the Red River last year. We had put some emergency rules in place that this year became actual law. Quick overview of what the ANS program does. We do a lot of outreach statewide. We work with a lot of partners on that. We do a lot of coordination, so we're talking with the other state agencies. We're meeting with the coordination or the invasive species committee and that sort of stuff. We're also doing statewide surveillance, so our fisheries guys are out there when they're doing their fishery sampling. They're looking for anything that looks out of place. And then I've got contractors that do some additional targeted sampling, and I do some additional targeted sampling as well. And of course, we have regulations. The biggest thing that we try to work on is outreach. We want people to know what the issues are, and we want them to know how to prevent the spread, because that's what we feel is going to be most effective in preventing the spread of aquatic nuisance species. We rely heavily on education, and we use regulations to back it up. So in our agency, we're using a multimedia approach. We've got press releases, we've got webcasts and TV ads and radio ads and newspaper articles and all kinds of things. We've got signs at all the locations, all the water access sites, things like that. And this year in particular, we've been focusing a lot on the new ANS rules, and we did some early reminders before people got out there, and we're doing some mid-season reminders so that folks don't forget. We've also worked with partners such as Friends of Lake Sakakawea has been a huge partner. We give them a grant every year, and they leverage our funds over 4 times what we give them. And they're running their own ads coming from Friends of Lake Sakakawea and Devil's Lake Chamber of Commerce and things like that. So it's not the government telling you what to do. These are concerned citizen groups that are saying this is important and we need to stop the spread of aquatic nuisance species. And so they have several efforts going on as well. Examples of what we're doing. We're now updating our brochure is one example. It was very, very text heavy, very boring, kind of like I see some of you falling asleep, very boring. And we're trying to update that, make it more concise, make it a little bit fresher look, and maybe a little easier for people to digest. We've also got new billboards up this year that shows you what zebra mussels look like if you've never seen them, and reminds you about some of the laws. We had a state fair display as well. One of the other quick outreach things before I move on is we had the International Legislators Forum this year, and that's delegates from Manitoba, Minnesota, South Dakota, and North Dakota that all meet to talk about important regional issues. And so they pick 3 topics every year. This year they had ANS, GMOs, and human trafficking. So we fit really well in with those. And we got 2 one-hour presentations. So we gave one on the introduction, so what are aquatic nuisance species, with some of the general specific, or the specifics on some of the zebra mussels and VHS and some of the species and viruses, I guess, of concern in our region. We also had a second presentation on managing aquatic nuisance species. So what is it that we do? Why do you hire us to deal with these issues? What are some of the considerations? You know, I'm talking to the State Water Commission, right? So you guys are concerned with water use. We have to be concerned with that as well, because even though I work for Game and Fish, my only concern isn't just boaters and anglers. I need to be concerned as well, and our program needs to be concerned with how are people that just use water for drinking, how are they using it, how are people that are using it for construction, how are ANS impacting them, and how could they potentially spread aquatic nuisance species as well. So we went through some of that. It was very well received, and it was very educational for them, educational for us, and basically the outcome from them was they wanted to make sure that we were working with all the appropriate people. We, as states, we're working, you know, with our neighbor states. Within our state, we're working with other agencies, things like that as well. So just examples of the slides, we really broke down what are aquatic invasive species, you know, and what those are. We also talked about some of the components. So what are we trying to do when we're talking about outreach and education? What are some of the potential outcomes? So we really broke it down for them, and it, like I said, it was well received. This year, new for us, we have 4 seasonals that are doing watercraft inspections. They are voluntary inspections. We use them more as education tools than anything, not to call my people tools, but they basically are out there talking with boaters. They're educating them about what are aquatic nuisance species, what are some of the regulations that apply directly to them, and then they're getting information back. So we're having them do a short survey, boaters do a short survey, that we can figure out what they already know about aquatic nuisance species, what they know about regulations, and maybe where some of those gaps are, and how are they finding out about the information. Are we wasting our time putting up billboards, or, you know, are the signs at the lakes sufficient so that we can focus our efforts as well? And one of the best feedback that we've received is when we were at a tournament at Devil's Lake, you know, we had some guys say, man, this is great. You know, we come here and we fish quite a bit, and we knew what the regulations were. They even knew about the new drain plug regulation, which we found out a lot of people didn't know about. But we didn't know how to do these things. So thank you for taking the time to show us how to look for vegetation, how to properly drain our boat, or, you know, most of the boaters know where all the drain plugs in their boat are, but some of them don't. So it's a learning tool for everybody. And again, our main objectives with the watercraft inspectors are education, and then gaining information back from the boaters. We do have, like I said, regulations in place for when our outreach efforts fail. Sometimes people respond better with an actual law in place. And the intent of these regulations is to prevent the spread of organisms and water, because that's where ANS are going to get spread. Some of those fall under that, in that clean, drain, dry. Some of them fall under clean. Some of them fall under drain. We don't have any in the dry because that's really hard to enforce. And this does apply as well with construction equipment, recreational equipment, anything. But all aquatic vegetation has to be removed before leaving a water body. All water also has to be drained. New for this year is that the drain plug has to be out during transport. So that's not just drain plugs either. That's any devices that hold back water. So an example on a watercraft, because that's what I'm more familiar with, is if you've got a bait well or a live well, sometimes they have standing, just like a standpipe in there. Those have to be out as well. And then for the Red River, I mentioned we had some new things there as well. We no longer let anglers take bait away in water. Again, we're trying to curb the removal of water from that system because we know there are zebra mussels in there, and we know that's a potential pathway for them. Other regulations, it is illegal to bring in live aquatic bait or aquatic vegetation into the state or to dump bait on shore. I talked about a lot of this, so I won't go through too much of it in detail. We're doing some monitoring of the zebra mussel population on the Red River, and our fisheries guys are kind of out there doing a lot of the work as well while they're out there. This year we did add some early detection work in some of our high-risk waters. We had done that to an extent in the past, but this year, now that we have a full-time ANS coordinator, I was able to get to a few more waters around the state and really make sure that we're getting some good samples. We've been finding hit or miss for boaters at various locations. We've been finding a lot of aquatic vegetation. Thankfully, most of it's been native. And we've been seeing some really green water, which makes it difficult to sample. We've got a lot of other things going on. You guys probably don't care so much about these either, but you know, we do equipment inspections for construction work that's being done in North Dakota. We're really concerned about equipment coming in from out of state or equipment that's been used in the Red River last. So that's where we focus our efforts on those. We also check any bait vendors that are permitted to import for retail into North Dakota. Things we get asked frequently are, can we do more, particularly with mandatory boat inspections and decontamination units? The short answer is, at this time, it's not feasible for us. They take a lot of money. They take a lot of personnel, and so that's not necessarily something we're looking at right now. If you guys wanted to have a more in-depth discussion about that, we certainly can. But otherwise, I will stop putting you all to sleep. And my contact information is here, so if you think of something later or you want to discuss something in more detail, feel free to call or email anytime. So if there are any questions, I'll be happy to take those.
So maybe, Jessica, you could address maybe some of your concerns for the next couple of years for ANS, and maybe specific to the Water Commission, talk about some impacts to like water intakes, like municipal and industrial, specifically in North Dakota.
Sure. So what we saw in Kansas was there are substantial increases in maintenance costs. We had nuclear power plants, we had coal-fired power plants, and then all the municipalities, all the rural water districts that draw water out of infested water bodies. We did see a significant impact to their maintenance costs. It's possible to protect the water source, the water coming in. It's very difficult to protect the intake structures. One of the easiest ways is through some coatings, which can be very expensive. They need to be applied regularly, you know, every couple years or so. So that's some of the impact that might directly affect people that use the water in that sense. In terms of how water is used or maybe permitted, I know we've talked a little bit maybe about some of the permitting issues. You know, especially on the Red River, we're concerned about how that water is being used. You know, if they're using it for construction and they're just spreading it on a road, obviously that's not a big deal. But if they start spreading a lot of water on the road, and maybe some of the runoff goes into a ditch that's filled with water, now there might be an issue there. So that's something that I envision the State Water Commission and Game and Fish working together in the future on some of those guidelines.
You're specifically referring to zebra and quagga mussels, right?
I'm specifically referring to zebra and quagga mussels. You know, if we were to get something like spiny water flea in our state, that would also apply to those, or other organisms that are microscopic in the water. Does that answer your question? Okay. Sorry.
Going back to the silver carp,
Sure.
years back, there used to be another fish that was a nuisance. It was called the alligator gar.
Sure.
I don't know if you've seen some news on that or anything, but yeah, it's very interesting now that the alligator gar is loves eating the silver carp. So is there any introduction or possibly hatcheries developing any more alligator gar?
Right. So for the folks on the phone, the question was, you know, there's been some strong interactions between alligator gar consuming silver carp, and alligator gar typically been thought of as an undesirable species. Is there any thought of utilizing those to control silver carp populations? The answer would be for North Dakota, I kind of hope not, because alligator gar are very, you know, they are native to parts of the United States, and that's fine. For North Dakota, I think it would have a huge impact on some of our native fishes and on some of our sport fisheries. So I don't see us going the route of trying to introduce a predator for silver carp for control. And we are fortunate that in North Dakota, we've seen very limited numbers of silver carp as well. We know they are in the James River, but depending on water levels and other factors, we've seen very few silver carp in North Dakota, and we hope that they'll kind of take care of themselves that way, and remain in low numbers. We're not looking at introducing a predator yet. Yes, sir.
Is salt cedar considered aquatic or not a nuisance species, and is any effort being done to try and control that?
Right. So the question was about salt cedar, and is it a nuisance species, and are there any control efforts underway for that? Yes, it is considered an invasive species. There's usually some debate, and it depends on the state on who actually has authority over that. I believe in North Dakota, Department of Ag has control over that. They consider it not necessarily a noxious weed, but it's definitely one that they're working to eradicate. And so we kind of leave that in their wheelhouse. And so I unfortunately don't have the answer on what the current control efforts are on that.
Jessica,
Sure.
I can help a little bit with that. Salt cedar has been found in North Dakota in the upper reaches of the Missouri. I think some of the on the Yellowstone a little, mostly down from the confluence. The Corps has found a couple of isolated plants below the dam. I don't know if it's shown up in any other reservoirs or not, but I know it's there. And we currently have an agreement with, I think, McKenzie County to they provide weed control reimbursement for that. And so they're coordinating with Game and Fish Department and the Corps of Engineers in that area to find it and eradicate it where they can. And I think Game and Fish is maybe taking a lead up there. I think Kent does a lot of that work because of the equipment that they have to get back into some of those swampy marsh areas. It's a difficult area to navigate, so it's real difficult to find it where it is and then to get it and control it. But there is a coordinated effort, and we do participate in that.
Apparently we do too. Good questions. Are there any questions from folks on the phone?
There is not.
Okay. Anything else? Okay, well, thank you all for your time, and like I said, if you have any more questions, feel free to to contact me directly, and I'll respond quickly.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. Our next two speakers are Jerry Heiser and Ashley Persinger from the State Water Commission. They're going to be splitting the presentation, so I'll just do both their introductions now. Jerry Heiser has been with the State Water Commission since '08. He was brought in to head the Sovereign Lands Program as the agency's first manager of the program, which was created due to the dramatic increase in issues following the Water Commission's emphasis on sovereign lands and the creation of the Sovereign Lands Plan in 2007. Jerry was born in Illinois and grew up in Verona, North Dakota. He earned a bachelor's degree in wildlife and range management from NDSU, go Bison. Prior to coming to the Water Commission, Jerry worked for the Bureau of Rec in Bismarck as a biologist. And then Jerry and his wife Cindy have 2 children, 3 stepchildren, 12 grandchildren, with one on the way, and then 2 great-grandchildren. Ashley Persinger is a recent addition to the Water Commission, having started as a program administrator of the agency's Sovereign Lands Program in June. Ashley was born and raised in Bismarck, North Dakota, and graduated from Bismarck High School. She attended NDSU, again, go Bison, where she earned a bachelor's degree in zoology and wildlife management. She has specialized in wetland delineation, avian biology, and vegetation identification. During her career, she worked for the Fish and Wildlife Service, the USGS, and the Game and Fish Departments in numerous western states before moving back to North Dakota in 2011. Before coming to the Water Commission, Ashley also worked with the private consulting firms in North Dakota, focusing on NEPA and permitting in the oil and gas industry. Thanks, Mike. Let's see. Great. No, it's
Broke it?
no, it's working. Normally, I have my 4-year-old granddaughter help me with this stuff, but ooh, that is. Let's try that. Touch the arrows right there. All right. I didn't break it.
Nope.
Okay, like I said, my name's Jerry Heiser. We're going to talk today a little bit about sovereign lands and sovereign land management. Some of the topics I'm going to cover are going to be history of sovereign lands in North Dakota, navigable waters of the state, ordinary watermark and ordinary watermark delineation, river and lake boundary changes, and their some of the effects they can have on tidal and tidal-related issues. And then Ashley is going to speak about some of the more specific sovereign land management issues, some of the regulations, and the sovereign land permitting process. Okay. First off, sovereign lands, what are they? Sovereign lands definition we have in code, it means those areas including beds and islands lying within the ordinary high water mark of navigable lakes and streams. Basically, sovereign lands, when I first started working here, people said, what do you do? I'm a sovereign lands manager. And they go, well, what does a state engineer have to do with tribal lands? And answer is nothing. Sovereign lands basically are those lands owned, managed by the sovereign. There's federal sovereign lands, state sovereign lands, tribal sovereign lands. When there were the original 13 colonies, the Crown held the navigable lakes, streams, tidal waters as sovereign lands for the public to use as highways for commerce and travel. We didn't have roads, railroads, those types of things. The primary mode of transportation was over water. And so water courses were retained by the sovereign to be used by the people for that use. Once we gained our independence from Great Britain, the original 13 colonies also took title to their respective navigable waters. The federal government held title to navigable waters in its territories in trust for the future states. So then as each state was admitted into the Union, they too took title to the beds and banks of their navigable waters under the equal footing doctrine. And So that is how North Dakota took title to its navigable waters. Basically, it's a consequence of statehood in 1889. The sovereign lands then they're managed by the states under a principle of the public trust doctrine, which is the principle that navigable waters are preserved for the public use, and that the state is responsible for protecting the public's right to use of those waters and beds. The North Dakota State Supreme Court also said that the state has they're to manage other important aspects of those state's public trust interests, such as bathing, swimming, recreation, fishing, as well as irrigation, industrial use, and water supply. So the state Supreme Court said it goes well beyond simply highway for commerce. The state sovereign lands have been managed by a number of different agencies. Originally, they were administered by the Land Department for a short time. I believe they went to the Bank of North Dakota, to the Garrison Diversion Conservancy District, back to the Land Department, and then ultimately to the state engineer in 1989. The state engineer took the responsibility of identifying and managing the state's sovereign lands, navigable waters. State engineer administers all the surface interests in the state sovereign lands. The Land Department retained management of all the state's mineral interests in sovereign lands. And then when the state engineer first took on sovereign lands, there weren't a lot of issues relative to sovereign lands, but that gradually grew as the public's interest in utilizing those lands for a whole host of uses gradually increased. People started using water more for everything from municipal, industrial to recreation, to the point where finally in 2007, the state engineer office prepared the sovereign land management plan and developed guidelines to delineate the ordinary high water mark of the state's navigable waters. Then in 2008, again, the body of work continued to grow. It was eating John's lunch. We got the authority to create a new position, that is a sovereign land manager, myself. So I came on in 2008. The body of work continues to grow, so this year we were fortunate in getting authorization to staff up even more so, and we hired Ashley Persinger as the sovereign land specialist. And so it keeps us hopping. Along with that, we keep the AG's office hopping as well. Jen loves sovereign lands.
That was not sarcasm. I really do.
So from there, you might ask, what are navigable waters? It's a term that gets thrown around a lot these days, especially by the feds. The term navigable water is basically we use it in terms of, navigable waters that are navigable in fact. Navigability is determined by two interrelated but significantly different federal standards. One being the equal footing doctrine, and that's what we use to determine state title. And basically, waters are navigable if they were navigable in fact, and that is means any waters that were in fact navigable at the time of statehood, that is, were used or were susceptible of being used in their ordinary condition as highways for commerce over which trade and travel were or may have been conducted in the customary modes of travel and trade on water. Basically what that means is if a water body was used as a highway for commerce or travel at the time of statehood, or susceptible to that use in the mode of transportation at the time, it's navigable in fact, and we exert title to those waters. At the time of statehood, we already had a lot of roads and trails, railroads, and water wasn't used a lot of the smaller streams and lakes weren't used for travel in that capacity. There were a lot of steamships operating in the state at that time on all the larger rivers and the larger natural lakes. And so that's been kind of our trigger. The other federal standard for determining navigability is under the Commerce Clause of the United States Constitution. And this is basically what the federal government uses. Congress has the power to regulate commerce with foreign nations among the several states and with Indian tribes. So the federal government looks at navigability from the standpoint of under Section 10 of the Rivers and Harbors Act, under the Federal Powers Act in 1920. And basically, we look at navigability from the terms of title. The state takes title to the beds and banks of navigable waters up to the ordinary high water mark. The federal government looks at navigability from the standpoint of regulatory authority. And so there can be an overlapping of these waters, but one really has nothing to do with the other. The fact that we determine a water to be navigable has no bearing on whether or not the federal government would come to a similar conclusion for their purposes. That does get a lot of questions and creates confusion right now because of the EPA's determination of waters of the United States and their definition of navigable waters and significant nexus and all the things that go along with that. So it does create some confusion and some concern when we deal with navigable waters, but the distinction is significant and important. For the terms of, from a standpoint of navigable waters of the state of North Dakota, you're looking at, that's the list of waters that we have determined to be navigable. And the state engineer has the authority and responsibility of identifying those waters that we would consider to be navigable in fact. And in so doing, we look at, when the question comes up on a particular water body, we'll research that water body out to see if there's any documented commercial usage of that water body at the time of statehood or shortly thereafter. Which can be difficult. Sometimes either didn't happen or did happen and it wasn't documented. But we look at old county histories, we look in history books, we look in family histories, we look in old newspapers where they might document something occurring on a particular water body. So you're kind of looking for a needle in a haystack and you're not sure there is a needle in the haystack. But that's the test that we put it to. And these are the water bodies that we feel were navigable in fact at the time of statehood. Now the state engineer will make his determination and then we'll exert our authority. But the final arbiter in that is the courts. For example, we used to claim the Little Missouri River as navigable. We were challenged in court, and subsequently, the judge ruled we did not make a case for navigability. He didn't say that it wasn't navigable, but he said we failed to support a case for navigability, therefore we no longer claim the Little Missouri River as navigable. And so that's the test ultimately is in the courts. And a number of rivers have been put to the test in the courts. The Missouri River, Devil's Lake.
From your list.
And so anyway, I'm sorry. What's that?
James River.
The James River from the railroad bridge to the South Dakota border has been the Red River and I believe the Mouse River. So Painted Woods Lake, Sweetwater. So there's a few. As I mentioned, if the state takes title of navigable waters to the ordinary high water mark, And the ordinary high water mark means that line below which the action of the water is frequent enough either to prevent the growth of vegetation or to restrict its growth to predominantly wetland species. Islands are considered to be below the ordinary high water mark in their entirety. Long and the short of it, when we do an ordinary high water mark delineation, it's basically that line where the vegetation goes from primarily wetland vegetation to primarily terrestrial vegetation. It's that 50-50 mark. Like I said, in 2007, the state engineer developed guidelines for delineating the ordinary high water mark. And those guidelines were intended to provide a science-based, repeatable, and defensible approach to delineating the ordinary high water mark of the state's navigable lakes and streams. It lays out the process, it lays out the primary indicators that should be looked at when you're in the field. Primary indicators, or the indicators of vegetation, and that is the primary indicator. But there are other things that are used to support that, of course, are soils, looking for a debris line or a rack line, water staining, erosion lines, and also doing a hydrological analysis. And when looking at these things, it's important to note that you're not looking at flood flows or things that are left behind by flood flows, nor drought conditions, but that mark left by the water where it's there frequently enough to dictate what vegetation will or will not grow. And here's an example of one of the delineations we did. This was done back in 2007. Stand the photo on it, and that is Lakewood Harbor, and that's the Lakewood Harbor and Jetty Beach area. You'll see the blue line. That is where the ordinary watermark was delineated at that location. And basically, the delineators, the guidelines call for starting from the landward side and moving towards the river. Basically, you do that to make sure that you don't miss any back channels. But when we do a relatively large area, we've had the contractor start from the water side and move in simply from an access standpoint. And with the use of good aerial photography, we can typically identify any back channels that may need to be looked at in depth to make sure that that's the line doesn't fall somewhere further back, so that you don't cut the line short by hitting a back channel that might not be the furthest back channel. So anyway, that's just one example of a delineation of, and also if you notice the blue line, they stopped it right at the Lakewood Harbor area, but the line would continue across. And we would do the same if there was let's say there's a creek that comes in there, we would just draw the line across the mouth of the creek as well, and that's where interest would stop. Things like Lakewood Harbor, Borden Harbor, Misty Waters, Marina Bay, the like, those are man-made excavated marinas, channels, bays. We do not exert title to those. That was previously patent land that they excavated out. They had title to it, but they were authorized to cut a channel to the river so they would have ingress and egress. But we do not exert title to those artificially constructed bays of that type. The river and lake boundaries, they can change with time. They do change with time. Rivers meander, lake levels rise and fall. And in terms of rivers, they change. The bank line can change through erosion, accretion, and avulsion. Erosion is the gradual and imperceptible washing away of soil from the bank of a river or lake. Accretion is the opposite of that. It's the gradual and imperceptible addition of soil by gradual deposition to the bank of a river or lake. Avulsion, on the other hand, is the sudden and perceptible action of water which causes the removal of a considerable quantity of soil that may result in a rapid change in course or the creation of a completely new channel. I'm just going to jump ahead to show a couple of examples of that.
This is just out the town, that area down there, Sibley Park wraps around this Mary's Bend, University of Mary up there. You can see the white and yellow areas on the right-hand photo. Those are rather large deposits of sand left behind by the flood of 2011. And if you do look, you can see where some of the bankland that was cut out. There's a hatched blue area. That all eroded away during the flood, and so sand deposited on the other side. So those are some fairly stark examples of erosion and accretion. And that is happening pretty much constantly. You know, those meanders move, and property interests move with it. The ordinary watermark is ambulatory. Tidal moves with the ordinary high watermark. So a landowner might lose land on one side through erosion, and tidal moves with it. The accretions that fall out elsewhere, once they rise above the ordinary high watermark, tidal also goes to the riparian landowner. Let's see, I want to go back briefly. Okay, well, as long as we talked about avulsion, we'll move ahead to that as well. Like I said, avulsion is the rapid and perceptible change in the river channel. This is an area called the Furlong Loop on the Missouri River, just upstream of Williston. The first photo was taken in 1958 and shows how this loop went through. What was happening back then is it would get ice jams and it would cause lots of flooding. So in 1958, you can start to see right here where the Corps of Engineers cut a channel through here. This is what it looks like today. You can still see the remnant channel, but now the river flows here. In an avulsion, if this could happen naturally on its own, and it often does, and typically that's where you'll see it happen, is you've got a sharp an oxbow, and they're slowly eroding closer and closer until finally it blows through a new channel and abandons this old channel. When that happens, those individuals who lost property, lost their land in that avulsive event, the state takes title to the new channel, and those landowners that lost land by that new channel, they take title to the channel abandoned. And it just so happens this, at the Furlong Loop area, that was a man-made avulsive event. This ultimately ended up in court over mineral issues, and the courts ruled that a man-made avulsive event has the same effect as a naturally occurring avulsive event. So we had the title switch. And the reason why tidal moves with the river is simply that the navigable waters were entrusted to the states to provide highways for commerce and travel. If tidal didn't move as the river moves, if tidal was static and the river moved over here, you've got a public highway that goes nowhere. It stops at this person's property. It could not possibly serve the purpose that it was intended for. So it's an interesting property law, but that is the case. Now, when it comes to lakes, there's two other boundary changes that occur more often than not on lakes, and that is submersion and reliction. Submersion is the covering of dry land by rising water levels. Great example, Devil's Lake. Reliction is the opposite of that. It's the recession or lowering of water resulting in uncovering of lands once submerged. So, and again, this is one that ended up in the courts, and the courts basically said, as Devil's Lake grew in size, as the water levels came up and engulfed more land, it's a navigable water. The state's interest moves with the water, and because the water level changes so rapidly, you can't really establish an ordinary high water mark in terms of vegetation and that sort of thing. The courts basically ruled that the state would take to the water's edge.
So the ordinary high water mark basically is wherever the water is at the time that you ask the question. And so as the water was coming up, the state's title interest grew with the water, and the riparian landowner basically lost title to his property, which of course caused, lots of concern and issues for those folks whose property was being inundated. Now that we're starting to see a little bit reversal in that, thanks to weather patterns and the Devil's Lake pumping, the lake has receded to some degree. Land has relicted, it's reemerged. Those reemerged acres go back to the person who held title at the time that it was submerged. So that in and of itself creates a lot of interest and controversy simply from the standpoint the lake filled up. People lost their livelihood. If you farmed and ranched, you lost your livelihood. But in come new types of industry, resort owners, fishing and guiding, people who now have lakeside homes and that sort of thing. So now when the lake starts going down, the farmers and ranchers are happy because now they've got land that they can utilize again and draw an income from. But those folks that are relying on that water for their use, recreational use or other industry, they're starting to say, well, wait a minute, shouldn't we keep it at some level? So it creates some interesting and complex questions. I failed to move ahead here. Go. So I touched a little bit on some of the river and lake movements and their potential effects on tidal. That's one of them. Like I said, rivers meander and lakes rise and fall. The ordinary water mark is ambulatory, moves with it. And tidal moves with the ordinary high water mark. And that does have an impact on riparian landowners, whether it's a lake or a river. Riparian landowners, they do have, in one of the court cases right here in Bismarck on the Missouri River, it was a title issue. The state Supreme Court said, again, that the state takes title to the ordinary high water mark, but the riparian landowner has certain correlative rights to the ordinary low. We do not have a definition for the ordinary low water mark, so we don't know what that is. So, for lack of a better term, we call it the shore zone, that area between the low and the high. And the courts did not tell us what those correlative rights are. And so we kind of deal with those as they come up. Basically, they said they have correlative rights of use, but not at the preclusion of the public's right to use. And so we've tried to work with that as it comes up. Basically, riparian landowners do have, we recognize their right to draw water for irrigation purposes, to access the water for livestock watering, livestock grazing, and those types of things. But again, not at the preclusion of the public's right to use. And so for most projects that occur on sovereign lands, even the riparian does need sovereign land permit for boat docks, for larger irrigation pipelines, for private boat ramps, and any other types of structures. But I'm not going to go into too much detail on some of the riparian rights and some of the more sticky issues relative to land rights, because I'm afraid I'm going to misspeak. I'm really scared of Jen. But that's my presentation in a nutshell. Like I said, we recently hired Ashley Persinger to assist with the sovereign land management issues. Ashley's been here all of 2 months and 2 days. We threw her in head first, and luckily she swims really, really well. So Ashley's going to speak now a little bit on some of the specific sovereign land management issues, permitting process, and those types of things. So.
Thanks, Jerry, for going over some of the more complicated items, for sure. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ashley Persinger. I'm new with the State Water Commission. I just started here on June 1st, same day as the new state engineer. I work side by side with Jerry doing sovereign lands permitting with the regulatory division here in Bismarck. So now that Jerry has gone over background on sovereign lands, formation, a little bit on riparian owner rights, I'm going to talk more about the permitting process itself, who needs a permit, why we need to permit these activities, a little bit on threatened and endangered species, recreation, and some of the pollution issues that we're dealing with here in North Dakota, and some about accessing and recreation too. So, what activities need a sovereign lands permit? So, any place, structure, or project that is below the ordinary high water mark on a navigable water needs a sovereign lands permit. So things like Jerry touched on a little bit, boat docks, private or public, boat docks and ramps, dredging activities, organized activities of over 25 people, like if you want to have a family reunion or a volleyball tournament out there, pipeline crossings, water intakes, bridge construction or repair, riprapping, bank stabilizations are all really good examples of projects that need a sovereign lands permit. So the Sovereign Lands Management Plan highlights details on all these activities, and you can access that on the link at the bottom of this slide. So the Sovereign Lands Permit application requirements. So on this application, you need the location and the water resource district, which is basically the county in which your project is occurring in, type of activity proposed, type or any of fill materials that you're going to use, purpose of the project, estimated start time, and there is also no application fee for the service. Common question that we do get here. So usually maps or drawings or a simple Google Earth image of your project would do for us to do a good review of your project. Average 3 months, maybe longer, depending on your complexity of your project. Big projects can require up to a year of good negotiation and discussions with us here. So I guess a little bit more about the actual process after we get your application. So after we get your application, we send out requests for comments from other state agencies on this list here. So a few examples of comments we received from these folks. The Parks and Rec might have a concern on a scenic trail or a river nearby the project that they have interest in. The Game and Fish, who was just talking a little bit ago, may recommend riprapping techniques to facilitate animal migrations under bridges, which are susceptible to roadkill in some locations. And they also always mention their ANS techniques, and especially with bridge design, they bring in, all kinds of equipment from other states. So they have comments and recommendations for those contractors to follow. So all these comments that we get are all taken into consideration. So are there any major concerns in any of these comments? Are there any concerns that would reshape the project design? So we would basically try to work with the applicant and revise the project and clarify any portion of the project that may need a little work or a little additional, design. So at that point, we would draft an internal memo, which would go around and get reviewed, which would highlight all these discussions and comments that we've worked through with our applicants, and we would recommend either a issuance or a denial of the permit, and that would go down to the state engineer with our recommendation for signing at that point. So all this permitting. So all this permitting allows for a safe development of all these different projects, which could have an effect on our navigable waters and our sovereign lands. So our review, basically, takes takes into account all these projects which may influence public safety or any privatization which may be occurring on these public areas. So some specifications we would look at carefully these days: depth of pipelines, crossings, and scour analysis results, water intake placement, bridge repair, demolition methods, as well as proper erosion management at construction sites and navigable waters. We also collaborate with other agencies such as the Corps of Engineers and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service with dredging and sandbar issues, as well as threatened and endangered species concerns. So I've mentioned a few other agencies now. So let's talk about the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers for just a second. So many of the types of projects that I just mentioned require another level of permitting from the Corps of Engineers. And the Corps of Engineers are sent a letter notifying them of the project that we receive, and they recommend, sometimes a Section 10 permit, and also we recommend to our applicants right away that contact the Corps and see what they say about your project. You may have to go through additional permitting in addition to Section 10. So yeah, some projects, for example, like boat docks, dredging, pipelines, among others, crossing Section 10 waters require the Section 10 permit. And there are 2 Section 10 waters in the state, the Missouri River and the Yellowstone River. So the Corps also administers Section 401 and 404 of the Clean Water Act, which regulates the discharge or dredge of fill material into waters of the United States and requires the operator to provide the permitting agency with a water quality certification. The Corps also administers Section 408 of the Rivers and Harbors Act, which regulates any alteration of a project which may have an impact to a USA's project like Garrison Dam or Lake Sakakawea. You can contact the Corps Regulatory Office in Bismarck here with this phone number for any questions on your project, and there's a link to their website as well. So we also work with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service on occasion with these 2 little birds here. So the Endangered Species Act is, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is one of the administrators of the Endangered Species Act. The piping plover on the left and the leaf tern on the right. These 2 birds find our sovereign land suitable nesting habitat, and they can be found on the Missouri River and Lake Sakakawea. The piping plover even has designated critical habitat, which runs up and down the Missouri River system. It's they're found definitely where most of the recreation and utilized sovereign lands are located. So the OSC collaborates with these agencies to work through some of these teeny issues which may come up. We can establish protective zones near nesting birds. In cases of projects or construction on sovereign lands, pre-construction monitoring may be a solution. What you guys can do to help bring these birds off the endangered species list are, please obey the breeding area signs. I'm going to put pictures of those signs up in a second here. And stay away from any known active nesting colonies. You can also put your dogs on a long rope when recreating on other non-posted sandbars, especially if you see these birds around, or even if you see broods of young Canada geese and waterfowl. It's just kind of the right thing to do with dogs around. I know my hunting dog was right off of chasing away and pillaging nests, so that's a good idea. But if you do find these nesting birds, or if you're getting squawked at or dove at, all you have to just carefully leave the sandbar that you're on and just get on out of there. And you sometimes see piping plovers do a broken wing display. So those are all good signs that there are young nearby or active nests. So, but questions and individual assessments on threatened and endangered species issues can be directed to the North Dakota Ecological Field Services Office in Bismarck, and their phone number and website is listed on the bottom of the slide. So our sandbars are definitely not just for the birds. We here in North Dakota are very lucky to be able to enjoy uncrowded resources, top-notch fishing, and recreation Many of us, including myself, spend a lot of time on our waters of the state, including Lake Sakakawea and the Missouri River. We all consider these resources extremely valuable, and they do contribute greatly to our quality of life. And here at the Water Commission, it's very important for us to maintain the public right to access these areas. With all this access and recreation, we are faced with some challenges from use and access. Sandbars, which can be accessed by vehicles, are under a constant barrage of large-scale dumping. Please be responsible and dispose of used appliances at the local landfill and not your local sandbar. I've seen all kinds of appliances on sandbars, TVs, fridges, you name it, everywhere. So the cost to dispose of a couch or a TV at the landfill is like $5 to $7. Local scrap yards or recyclers will even come and pick them up from your house for free. So there's a lot of good resources out there to get rid of that stuff. On the left is a truck, which I discovered on the South Washington sandbar 2 years ago. First it was burned, or first it was abandoned, then it was torched, and then it was just left there. So some good Samaritan friends of mine spent a day digging it out of the sand and pulling it off of that sandbar. So this kind of stuff takes some special equipment and special knowledge to remove, and the cops were of course called on that to make sure there wasn't any illegal activity occurring with that location. And on the other side there, was an old truck camper that I found on the same sandbar. First it was abandoned, then it was run over, I think, and then it was burned. So I don't know, these activities are silly, reckless, and dangerous, and you know, requires special people to go clean up. So far better choice to run up to the landfill and dispose of those items, or the thrift store, or whatever you need to do. So yeah, so these are your sandbars, you guys, for sure. The Missouri River creates amazing places for us to go hang out on. However, beach litter can be found on most accessible sandbars on the Missouri River where recreation is possible or popular. So not only are the large items unsightly and difficult to remove that we just talked about, but the litter is also not a good thing either. It blows around, poses threats to wildlife, and gets in the water. So never ever throw your glass beer bottles in the fire. It's not only illegal to possess on the beaches here in the state, the pieces are impossible to remove from the sand and may cause injuries down the line. Also, we've seen this too, never burn stacks of pallets on the beach. It leaves hundreds of nails behind, which is also a danger to future recreators. So take care of them. Keep your beaches barefoot safe. And you know, if you're out there, please set a good example and clean up other people's litter when you have the chance. People see you doing that, it really sets a good example and a message of responsibility. The OSC runs our Keep Your Beaches Clean campaign. We run this every spring, reminding recreationists to be mindful of their trash. These OSC signs are posted near popular beaches and boat ramps. Keep in mind that littering and the possession of glass on our beaches are punishable with fines up to $250. So just a few things about accessing our sovereign lands. The OSC and the North Dakota Game and Fish Department have agreed to allow patrolling and citation issuance on sovereign lands by a written agreement in order to avoid penalties and injury to others or injury or death to a protected bird. Please be aware of a few rules that we have in place to manage these lands that we do have. Some prohibited activities, I guess we've already talked about the glass and the littering, but pets or dogs must be on leashes when in the Bismarck-Mandan reach. You cannot remove artifacts, cannot bait wildlife for any purpose, cannot fill or dredge without a permit, you cannot camp for more than 10 days in the same vicinity, and you can't empty boat or camper holding tanks. A few of the popular common activities which are allowed, collection of downed wood, bonfire, temporary boat mooring, camping, hunting, fishing, like my summer in a nutshell. One thing I am going to touch on is motorized vehicle access. So what you can and can't do under North Dakota law. These rules are further outlined in the Sovereign Lands Management Plan, Administrative Code, accessible on our website. But the only area that has been authorized for off-road use of vehicles is Kimball Bottoms Rec Area, aka the desert south of Bismarck, and a few other government established trails. You can also access these properties by vehicle if you're launching a watercraft, accessing frozen surfaces of navigable waters, accessing private land via sovereign land, but only by the most direct route. You can access if you have a mobility impaired permit, or access when it's part of a permitted project, like if you permitted through us and we've negotiated a route for you, and you can go ahead and do that. And also, government employees can access if they're performing other duties. So just a few postings to be aware of. Be aware of the OSC No Trespassing sign, which does have the RAP line phone number displayed on it. You will see this combined with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers sign right there on some sandbars which have active piping plover and least turn nests established. This OSC sign is not posted between river miles 310 and river miles, or 3010 and 3020, basically between Fort Lincoln and Misty Waters. Be aware that the Endangered Species Act is still protecting these birds within that stretch of river. There's a couple others out there. So there's the OSC Beaches sign in action combined with a few other signs at popular access points. This one's down at Steamboat Park there, and the one in the middle is down at South Washington Street, where some of those other issues are taking place there. Another sign that you guys are familiar with is the common posted sign. Now, I'm putting this up here just a reminder that riparian landowners cannot post below the ordinary high water mark. Now, as a recreationist, you guys may not access sovereign land by private land, but you can sure access sovereign lands from your boat or vessel and recreate below that ordinary high water mark. Now, even from your boat, you may see this posted sign up on a tree or up even on a boat dock or a ramp or even on a beach. But just stay near the water's edge and recreate down in that area and you'll be fine. So, the goal of the state engineer in managing this vital resource to manage, operate, and supervise North Dakota's sovereign land for multiple uses that are consistent with the public trust doctrine and are in the best interests of present and future generations. So a few sources for literature information. The State Water Commission is loaded with extensive links and documents where you can find information. A search on the website for sovereign lands will bring up past issues and articles. In the current and the Oxbow, you can view past news releases from Jerry, sovereign lands management rule changes and updates, and any other recent changes that you should be aware of. Also, if you're interested in keeping up with North Dakota's water programs and projects, subscriptions to these really cool publications are available. You can get them sent to your house, or you can just view them online. So I'd recommend checking those out. So any questions in the Sovereign Lands Permit applications can be sent to us here in Bismarck. Thank you so much for listening to this water forum topic hosted by the State Water Commission Sovereign Lands Management Team. Again, feel free to give us a call if you need any assistance with permitting. So thank you very much.